This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar where we're going to look at the Level 4 Associate Project Manager and the requirements for the endpoint assessment. So my name's Leo Webster. I'm the Customer Success Manager over at EPA+. I've also got with me Karen Carroll, who is the Delivery Manager for a number of standards, but importantly the Associate Project Manager standard. So we're going to be looking at a number of different things. We're going to be looking at the run up to Gateway, what's required at Gateway itself, and then also looking in detail at what's required for both of those assessment components. So I hope you find it helpful today. So the Level 4 Associate Project Manager, really it's been developed to prepare apprentices for that associate project manager kind of role. So, you know, it might be assistant project manager, junior project manager, project team member. You know, the project manager does encompass so many different things that it can include a role within a variety of different roles in a variety of different organizations. Yeah, it's a really, really broad and diverse sector. And project management skills tend to be applicable in any work that you do, you know, as I'm sure you're more than familiar with. It's a really good little snippet there, the overview of the APM role. So managing project work and teams for businesses and other organizations. It really kind of encapsulates what project management's all about. So within this apprenticeship, there's the IPMA Level D qualification or APM Project Management qualification, and that provides the apprentice with an industry recognized qualification, which is, you know, a really good bonus when carrying out and undergoing an apprenticeship for those apprentices. So the endpoint assessment, importantly, does assess the full range of knowledge, skills, and behaviours listed in the published standard, utilising the portfolio of evidence that underpins the presentation and the professional discussion. There's a link to the standard there as well. So if you do want to have a look at the standard and the assessment plan, you can find it alongside all of the other apprenticeship standards on the Institute for Apprenticeships website, which is really good. It's a really useful tool for finding information out. So this is what the timeline looks like really, from start to finish. So number one, the apprentices undertaking their on-program learning. So, you know, that's where you, the provider, are delivering that on-program learning, you know, teaching them the knowledge, skills, and behaviours that are required in the standard, and also taking them through that mandatory qualification as well. The next step is to register the apprentice onto SEPA, and we do expect that to be at least 3 months before the required endpoint assessment gateway request. And the reason we require that notice is so that we are able to adequately resource ourselves to be able to give the quality endpoint assessment service that we deliver. So once that apprentice's forecast endpoint assessment date within SEPA or EPA expected date arrives, the gateway checklist should be completed and all of the evidence should be uploaded, and that way you are putting all of that information that's required at Gateway, which we'll talk about in a second, just in one place for that independent endpoint assessor to be able to look at and review. You'll then be able to put them through Gateway on the SEPA system and request EPA as it's kind of described within the system. The next step is that your independent endpoint assessor will review that gateway documentation. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. And then they'll get in touch and arrange those assessment dates directly. The next stage, stage 5, is that the assessment methods take place. So that presentation and that professional discussion take place kind of as arranged with that independent endpoint assessor. And then finally, EPA results are issued once those assessments have taken place, and we issue individual assessment results within 5 working days of that assessment taking place. So again, just at a snapshot, what the kind of the key timescales. So the registration must take place 3 months before that apprentice is due to go through Gateway. The EPA process takes usually up to a maximum of 8 weeks. The EPA phase, so we'll review that Gateway checklist within 4 working days and give a decision on it, making sure that all of those documents and the evidence is checked and everything's in order that needs to be. And then, as I mentioned earlier, feedback for the assessments on SEPA is made within 5 working days of the assessment date. And the final overall grade after both of those assessments have taken place is awarded. So that will be a pass, merit, or distinction, or a fail, you know, where that does happen. So I'm going to hand you over to Karen now, who's going to talk about the Gateway process and the assessments.
Thank you, Leo. Hi, everyone. This is just to go through what the Gateway audit requirements are. There's a number of mandatory uploads that are required at Gateway. So the first 2 are the Level 2 English and Level 2 Maths Achievement certificates. The APM PMQ certificate, or the Level D, as Leo mentioned in the earlier slide. The portfolio of evidence, which must have all the evidence for the 15 learning areas that have been chosen and all the relevant documents, and we'll talk more about the portfolio of evidence as we go on. There must also be the portfolio of evidence tracker, a signed Gateway declaration form, and that's signed by all 3 parties, the employer, the ITP and the apprentice. And it's also very useful to have the panel member details ready at Gateway. One of the things we would say is that actually it's quite useful if you have that uploaded on a Word document at Gateway too, but you can also give that to the allocated assessor when they make contact. Next slide, please. Thank you. So at the Gateway, before we actually accept the apprentice through, the assessor, the IEPA, will do an initial check of the portfolio and its contents. It's not a full review, it's an initial check. So following our guidance, if we feel the portfolio at that time in its current state could potentially adversely affect the assessments. So for example, if they've exceeded the total maximum number, it's huge. There's a huge amount of recordings in there which take a very long time to assess. We may decide to refer that portfolio back to you at that time and possibly reject the Gateway then. However, we're doing that so that you could be offered the opportunity to revisit and review the portfolio. So anything that we feel may have that adverse effect, you will have the opportunity to put right, because we believe in giving the apprentice the best possible opportunity to achieve their apprenticeship. If we do accept them through Gateway at that initial check, but later on when we do the full review, if we find more examples of such as in the list above, we may decide to refer the portfolio back to you again, but again, it's to offer you the same opportunity as above. Now, if you feel for whatever reason that what's already in existence is sufficient and you don't want to make those changes, you must let us know in an email so that we have that recorded, that you are aware that going forward, if we feel it could adversely affect it, we have informed you of that basically. Okay, next slide please, thank you. So if we look at the assessments now, so the portfolio of evidence, whilst it's not entirely assessed in its own right, it is reviewed and it is used as the basis of the presentation and PD. So the apprentice is expected to choose 15 of the 17 available learning areas, which will be the focus of their portfolio. 10 of those are for the professional discussion specifically, and 5 will be the focus of their presentation. But all 15 must be contained within the portfolio to start with. The portfolio must also include a self-assessment and achievement log. This can be evidenced in a variety of ways, a specific log, part of a performance review or appraisal, but it must be clear where that is. So we initially review it against those learning areas, and the panel members are invited to review that as well, and they will submit their findings to the IEPA, but I'll discuss that later. So when we review the portfolio, the questions are then devised in preparation for both the presentation and the PD, and again, we'll include any input from the panel review. So the presentation itself is a maximum of 45 minutes in total, and that includes the Q&A session. So on that basis, we recommend that the presentation itself would last no more than 30 minutes, and that will be followed by up to a 15-minute Q&A session. So the presentation is based on those 5 chosen learning areas, but it should not be a regurgitation of everything they've put in their portfolio, because you've already given us that information. It should be an overview of the most relevant points of the project. So basically, think of the good bits, what the benefits and successes were, if there were any failures, and what lessons have been learned. It's the opportunity for the apprentice to be able to do some real reflection and evaluation, but also potentially analyse. So what did you do well and what would you improve? And it's really important for them to consider that sentence for themselves as well as the organisation or the project. So it really is their opportunity to lift their scores to potentially achieve that distinction. Okay. So the professional discussion. So if the portfolio, as we said at the audit, is very weak and a substantial number of questions would be needed, that's when we have to consider to refer it. So the more robust the evidence is that meets as much of that criteria as possible, the less direct questions are needed at the PD, which will make it a much more relaxed and much less stressful discussion for the apprentice. The PD is not intended to be a Q&A session, so this is why we need a minimum number of questions so that we can have a much more free-flowing discussion with the apprentice. It's designed to explore any weaker areas or confirm some aspects of the evidence. So again, it's allowing that opportunity for the apprentice to confirm, expand and strengthen their evidence, and hopefully then be able to lift it to a merit or a distinction. And obviously the PD is obviously an opportunity for us to be able to validate that the work completed is the apprentice's. And the PD itself lasts a maximum of 60 minutes. Okay. So if we look at the panel and their involvement in those assessments, so again, if you have those panel member details ready at Gateway, you can pass them straight onto the IEPA, because without those details, it does delay things quite substantially. And as I said, ideally, if you have a Word document with those details on uploaded to SEPA, that would be the best scenario. So once we have those details, information on the review of the portfolio and details of the assessment date will be emailed directly to each panel member. All panel members must email their review notes to the assessor prior to the assessment date, but they will agree a time frame with you. The assessment sessions themselves involves the panel, and it consists of 3 people: the IEPA, a representative from the training provider, and a representative from the employer. Now, in some exceptional circumstances where one of those members is unable to attend, the assessment can go ahead with just the IEPA and one other panel member. During the assessments, panel members are allowed to prompt the apprentice only, so they could remind them of a particular project if they feel it was relevant, but they cannot lead or provide answers for the apprentice. If that does happen, that answer will be disregarded for the assessment, and we could have to stop the assessment if it continues to happen. Because if that does happen, the panel member is actually putting that apprentice at a disadvantage. So only the assessor is allowed to directly ask the pre-prepared questions. And then once we get to the end of it, if it's required by the panel, if they feel there's a need, the apprentice will be asked to leave the room, and obviously that will depend digitally or physically, whether it's face-to-face or online. And they will be asked to leave the room between the assessments so that the panel can discuss their thoughts and any notes with the assessor. And then after the assessment session's finished completely, any notes that the panel members have made should be emailed immediately after the conclusion to the assessor. Okay. So what we're going to do now is look at what you might think is an ideal presentation. So what would we be looking for? And again, this isn't prescriptive. It's you know, this is just an ideal world. This is just an overview of what we would like to see and what we feel would give the best opportunity for the apprentice. So the presentation is an overview of what we think of as the best bits of the project. So give a little context, set the scene, and then tell us about the things that went well and didn't go so well. What lessons were learned and how you would do things differently or improve on them. And then a little bit of an evaluation of the project. And the important bit to remember is the 5-point scores that lead it up towards a merit and distinction are actually about the apprentice being able to say what difference it has made, not just to the team and the organisation, but also to the apprentice themselves and their own performance. So that basically it's the opportunity for the apprentice to shine, to try and achieve that distinction, to tell us everything that went really well, but again, not reading aloud from huge numbers of slides, regurgitating the portfolio. So in an ideal world, the presentation would be 20 to 30 minutes long, an average of maybe 5 to 8 slides, each with the bullet points and the main areas. And then let the apprentice do the talking, let them show their passion about the project and the subject. And the thing to remember is all the main knowledge, skills and behaviours for those 5 learning areas should already be in the portfolio. Okay. So then we're going to look at what we would expect an ideal portfolio to look like. So ideally, there would be one each of the required documents from the first page of the evidence tracker, and we'll look at that evidence tracker a little later on. But the required documents are, there must be some sort of project monitoring or progress document, a budget document, a business case, the consolidated plan, schedule document, risk management document, quality management and resource management. Now, as it says there, bear in mind that some of those may form part of a bigger document. They don't all have to be separate as long as it's very clear where they are and what they are. So we'd average approximately, you'd have about 8 documents there as a maximum. We're then looking for examples of communication to various audiences. So again, this shouldn't be page after page of reports and emails, just a few screenshots in the written accounts, or if relevant, 3 or 4 good examples. That's all that's required. So again, maybe an approximate maximum of 4 documents there. Then we'd be looking for 1, 2 or 3 written accounts, and this is the story of the project. So each account could cover a number of learning areas. For example, if you'd got 3 written accounts, this is how you could separate them out. So the first account could give us the background, the relevance, the governance, the context, business case, etc. The second one could look at stakeholders, schedule management, risk, quality, resources. And the third one would cover what is actually mostly the behaviours. So that would be collaboration, leadership, drive for results, etc. And a good meaty employer statement to back those particular learning areas up would really validate those behaviours and be really good evidence. So all that's needed to cover the apprentice's knowledge is shown there, but also we need to see how they've applied that knowledge. So the third one in particular, the apprentice is encouraged to review and evaluate their own performance. So if we're looking at approximately up to 3 documents, each of those documents averaging maybe 6 to 8 pages, a total portfolio based on what you can see there would approximately be around 15 or less pieces of evidence. So as you can see, this is why we do say that there is a maximum of 25 pieces of evidence, because obviously some apprentices will have more evidence and some will have less, but that in our opinion is an ideal portfolio. Okay, over to you, Leo.
Thanks, Karen. So what I'm going to do now is look at some of the newer guidance documents that we've released that really will give you the opportunity to, well, really they're there to help you out as much as they can and to make things clear both for yourselves and to us, where these kind of pieces of evidence sit within the portfolio, and also to ensure that you're able to really demonstrate that all of those necessary parts have been identified. So, you know, we've got here the evidence tracker, and it is quite a comprehensive evidence tracker, because what you can do on this first document is identify where those learning areas sit, so whether they sit either in the presentation or the professional discussion. It also highlights what our required portfolio evidence is, so you can see there exactly where those kind of documents are going to sit. And then looking at pages 2 to 8, this is a really detailed evidence tracker. So these are all of the assessment criteria throughout. And you can use this to highlight exactly where these pieces of evidence arise and where these assessment criteria are met. And this way you have a full understanding of exactly where all of those pieces of evidence and all of those assessment criteria are being met. And as this highlights, a really, really important bit is the self-assessment box. So you can tick that self-assessment box when you're confident that that self-assessment has been completed. And that way it's just a bit of a reminder to ensure that you're able to include that. So next up, we've got the portfolio guidance document. And again, this is really, really comprehensive. So it's detailed guidance on how best to prepare an effective portfolio of evidence. And, you know, a lot of this we have gone through throughout this presentation already, but, you know, detailing all those relevant areas with exemplars as well. So showing you exactly what kind of evidence we would expect to see at the level 4 Associate Project Manager. And even down here, you know, talking about what the independent endpoint assessor is looking for. So they're looking for evidence that is sufficient, covering all aspects of the criteria that's being claimed for. It's authentic, so you know you're able to explain and substantiate the evidence in your own words. Relevant, to ensure that it is relevant towards those assessment criteria, and also current, relating to the knowledge, skills, and behaviours that you demonstrate. And those assessment criteria are shown in a lot of detail in the new assessment specification guidance document that we've created. All of those assessment criteria are detailed and exactly what the requirements are for a pass, a merit, and those higher distinction grades. So really do have a look at those assessment criteria and really familiarize yourself with them to understand, you know, exactly what we're looking for each of those learning areas. And then finally, we have the exemplars. So, you know, looking at what an exemplar portfolio evidence record looks like, as well as, again, some information thinking about areas that apprentices might consider when looking at the resource, and also think about, for you to think about, you know, how pieces of evidence could be improved, how they can be tailored towards the requirements set out within the assessment plan. And here's those exemplars. So they do show in detail, you know, here is kind of a couple of pages on project governance and an org chart highlighting exactly where the apprentice sits within the organization. And again, looking at specific evidence for project meetings or you know, project plans or Gantt charts or similar to show the apprentice actually using those specific tools. So with that, I'm going to hand you back over to Karen to talk about the grading and some useful tips.
Thanks, Leo. So, excuse me, each individual assessment method, so that's the presentation and the PD, are scored as you can see there. So the presentation with the 5 learning areas, each one of those learning areas is scored between 1 and 5 points, and the total score is out of 25. A professional discussion has the 10 learning areas, and again, each one is scored between 1 and 5 points, and that total score is out of 50. Once we've got a score for both of those, they're added together So the final grade is calculated out of 75 over both of those assessments, and that will give the final overall grade in the table you can see there. So in order to achieve a merit, the score must fall between 56 and 65, for example. Okay, so this is just a little bit about resits and retakes, something that you need to be aware of if the apprentice does unfortunately fail. So a resit is where an apprentice does not require any further learning. So it could be that there was an issue on the day and we've had to rebook it, etc. A retake is where further learning is required, and that evidence needs to be uploaded to SEPA prior to any retake date. So that will be you providing the evidence that they have done that. Any resits or retakes are capped at 3 attempts, and evidence of additional learning must be provided before any third attempt can be authorised, regardless of whether it's a resit or a retake. And once they get to 3 attempts, unfortunately, that's the final attempt. And so that if they still fail at that point, then the whole apprenticeship will be a fail. A resit or a retake cannot take place for anyone who has gained a pass in order for them to be able to get a higher grade. The grade is the grade, basically. All APM assessment retakes are capped at a pass grade. So if they do a retake, regardless of the score that they achieve, they will only be able to achieve a pass grade. And if they fail their apprenticeship, they will be able to retake the failed assessments. However, we do have to record the original fail grade, but that will change once they subsequently achieve. Okay. So what we've got now is a couple of slides just to give you our sort of top tips. So the things to bear in mind are, make sure you have an eye on the EPA throughout your delivery. It's really important that you guys have an understanding of the standard and what will be assessed at EPA. And please do make use of our updated guidance documents. It's really important on the assessment day that the apprentice has everything to hand. That includes their portfolio and it definitely includes their photo ID. We do have occasions where the apprentice suddenly disappears for 5 minutes trying to search out where the passport or the driving license is. So it's really important they're fully prepared. So again, it's really important to make sure that the portfolio is robust and it covers all 15 of those learning areas. It's really, really important thing to remember is that it's quality over quantity and really less is more. As I said earlier, there should be a maximum only of 25 pieces, and those pieces of evidence really do need to be as holistic as possible. We do find that we have a lot of duplicated evidence. So, someone will write a written account about governance, but then include a lot of what they've written about governance in another written account about the business case. So rather than having several different things that actually do a lot of duplication, pull it all together into one and then just upload the main required pieces of evidence. We do have some occasions where we have portfolios that have got draft pieces of evidence and then a final piece of evidence. We don't need to see any of that. We just want the final piece. So it's really vital to make sure you've done your own IQA processes and check for spelling, punctuation, grammar. Although they're not assessed directly on that, it's really important to present the best work. And obviously check for plagiarism as well. Some apprentices don't appear to understand what plagiarism is and how to correctly use and reference examples. So that's something that you need really to be teaching them. And pieces of text from other places, from other sources, should only ever be used to confirm or back up the apprentice's own thoughts, not to be in place of their own knowledge. The portfolio evidence record, we rely on that to cross-reference with what you're saying and what you're thinking. So it's really important that the titles match the references on that, the titles of the evidence match the references on that evidence record. And another important thing to remember is that the PMQ certificate cannot be used to reference any of the knowledge criteria. It is something that they have to achieve before coming to Gateway, but the portfolio must contain all the evidence to cover all the knowledge, skills and behaviours. Okay. Again, ensure the apprentice has an understanding of all aspects of the learning areas that they've chosen. So for instance, the leadership learning area is a knowledge and behaviour learning area. So they must demonstrate their knowledge with detailed examples of how they've applied the behaviours in their work. So it's not just sufficient to cover only the knowledge. Where the criteria states that they've developed, prepared a document or maintained a document, it's really important they state what their contribution has been, not just that they've done it. We do have occasions where that happens. And again, as I said earlier, it's really important that they get used to talking about their own performance. So what they've done, what went well, and what would they improve on for their own performance. A really important thing to remember is please never assume that because you know what the apprentice means that we will. You've worked with them for a long time and we haven't. We have a snapshot. So we need that evidence to be as clear and easy to follow as possible, because we cannot make assumptions on their behalf, and our assessment time is not open-ended, unfortunately. It is time limited. So therefore, that's why a smaller number of really concise, holistic pieces of evidence is really key to a good endpoint assessment. So again, for the presentation, be concise, make sure the apprentice has practiced it to the timings. Because what we do find sometimes is we do have some apprentices that go off on tangents and start rambling, unfortunately. And again, the presentation is time limited, so it's really important that they've practiced it. As I said earlier, the presentation, it's the good bits, the benefits, the lessons learned, and that opportunity to reflect and review. So what went well for themselves as well as the organisation. And the final top tip, if you've got any concerns at all, you're not sure about anything, just talk to us. Please speak to your relationship manager in the first instance, and they'll speak to myself and the assessors. And usually there is very few issues that we can't help to resolve. Okay.
So that's all from us today. I hope you found that really, really useful. Really just kind of breaking down some of those requirements. And again, as Karen's just mentioned, if you do have any questions, do just get in touch with us. You know, we're happy to help out, and if you do have any questions, we're happy to help you to work through those queries before it does get to the point of endpoint assessment. Yeah, we're always here to help, but thank you very much for coming along today, and I hope you found it useful. Take care and have a lovely day.